As nature photographers, we can easily find ourselves in some nasty weather.
So the question is, do you stay out in the field and risk your expensive camera gear, or do you run for cover?
This week we will share some strategies to make sure that your gear can survive even the most challenging conditions. So Glenn, when we filmed the last bird photography show, you were just about ready to enter a ship and sail down to Antarctica. But at the same time, we were all a little bit concerned as well because you weren't taking a backup camera body, and you also didn't want to take a teleconverter to increase the reach on the 100 to 500, which was your main lens that you're taking. So the big question now is, how did it go? Is that tears of joy or tears of frustration in your eye?
Well, I'm happy to report that it's tears of joy because my trusty R5 survived, my lens survived, and even though we were in some really extreme conditions, I mean, crazy blizzards, as hard as snow can come down, but you know, I just wanted to stay out there and keep shooting. I mean, there was some really cool shots of the penguins with the snow falling down, piling up on them. You know, overall, it was a great trip. It has its ups and downs like any trips do, you know. On the downside, right when I got down there, I got COVID, not awesome. There's this avian bird flu that's been going all around the world, and unfortunately, it's kind of landed down in the Antarctic region as well. So there was like these extra security protocols and stuff, which made certain things more challenging. But at the end of the day, I have nothing to complain about. It was a great trip.
Let's quick fire your top 3 moments from awesome 2 or 3 weeks down in Antarctica and South America.
Okay, well, I would say number 3 would have to have been seeing those beautiful pumas or the cougars up so close. I mean, it's an amazing place to go because we have cougars here where I live. I've seen 1 in 20 years. And we saw 4 in 48 hours in Patagonia. I think my number 2 moment was being down in Antarctica, this stunning landscape, and cruising around through the ice and snow, icebergs around, all this sort of pack ice. I was getting some awesome shots of these beautiful snow petrels. But there is a clear standout number 1 moment from this trip. We had this unbelievable opportunity where all these Gentoo penguins were coming back on land. They were all out at sea, and we just happened to be at the right place at the right time. And something like 5,000 to 8,000 Gentoo penguins came back ashore right in front of us, jumping out of the water, 1, 2, 10 at a time. It was absolute pandemonium, and I just happened to be in a great position to be able to get some really cool action shots. So I think for me, that's the one moment from this trip that I'm going to remember for the rest of my life.
Well, that sounds and looks pretty amazing. And I bet having a zoom lens in this situation probably was pretty good as well, because with a 600 prime there, you probably would have had a lot of clipped heads and feet and tails.
Oh, the 600 would have been a disaster for that landing. And the other thing, this is like kind of an aside. So they were offering people to, if they wanted to do a polar plunge, and this was the landing that they offered to do it. So I almost didn't bring my camera. So that would have been absolutely tragic.
But did you do the polar plunge? I think is the big question here now.
I did not.
So last time you said that you wouldn't be taking your big 600mm prime lens and the 100 to 500 would be your main lens. How did you go with that decision? Did you feel shortchanged, or was it the right choice?
The 100 to 500, it's just such an amazing lens. It just keeps surprising me and keeps impressing me over and over with the really nice focal length, the great image stabilization. It was a really great lens on this trip.
Did you find yourself a little bit concerned with the lens being an external zoom and snow landing on it and ocean spray landing on it? Were you like scared to zoom in and out, or did you trust the lens and just go for it?
I mean, a bit of both. I definitely trusted it because it is an L lens. It's supposed to be weather sealed. And I remember you saying about how you were shooting those cassowaries in the pouring rain and you had no issue. So I was like, hey, if Jan's already torture tested this lens, I'm going to go for it too. But I was definitely trying to brush the snow off when I could. And that one particular shoot, you know, when we finally got back to the ship, right away I grabbed some towels and I was trying to dry everything and make sure to like kind of baby it and leave it zoomed out. And it was all fine. It was all fine. No fogging, nothing, no problems.
Speaking about extreme weather, I also tried to get you to buy a teleconverter, but with all the snow you had down there, it probably wouldn't have been the best idea to try and change extenders.
Yeah, to be honest, I honestly don't think I would have used a converter on this trip because of the conditions, the snow, the wind, the rain. When you're shooting in the cold and you're wearing gloves and you're all these clothes, these layers of clothes on, trying to undo zippers and take off lens caps, and it's just not worth it. You're missing the shot while you're fumbling around with your gear. So you kind of want a very versatile lens that you don't have to faff around with in the field and you can just get on with getting shot. So that, for me, the 100 to 500 was almost ideal for that.
Speaking about a lens that could do these things, Canon, while you were gone, has released the 200 to 800 millimeter lens. Did you feel like that could have been something interesting having 800 instead of 500 millimeters?
The thing that would concern me on a trip like this, as we've already talked about, kind of the theme of this episode are these extreme conditions, and we barely trust these L series weatherproof lenses. And then this one's not an L lens, and it says it's like weather resistant. And all of a sudden you start to wonder, maybe it'd be fine. Maybe not. The focal length is definitely intriguing, the 200 to 800. You know, you could get the whole body of the penguin. 200 you could zoom out and maybe get landscape shot, and then zoom into 800 and get a headshot. It's such a crazy super zoom range that it would be versatile for sure. But I think for me, I want to wait and see how people's reviews are of that lens before I'm going to buy one. But I know you already placed a pre-order, so we'll have to wait and see.
I did, and I might just throw it in the bathtub and see what happens. But this raises an interesting point because a lot of the most popular lenses are not fully weather sealed or the top of the line lenses, like the 180 to 600 Nikon, the 200 to 600 Sony, and now the 200 to 800 Canon. They're a little bit below their highest sort of high quality, most weather sealed lenses. So what are some techniques that you use in the field to protect some gear that might not be so weather sealed, or even 100 to 500? You sometimes probably want to protect it somehow from the conditions, especially if you're in a sandstorm, for instance. You probably then don't want to zoom back and forth.
I should have had a cover with me on that particular day out in the field. If I had, I definitely would have put it on, and I would have felt a lot more relaxed about the equipment. Normally, I have a very minimal kind of just like a sleeve, essentially, this waterproof cover that's always in my backpack. But of course, and again, on this trip, I didn't have my backpack with me. So it would have been nice to have that. Also in my fanny pack that you all know I always have with me normally. I didn't have it in this trip. But in there, I have just like a sort of a big plastic bag that in a worst case scenario, I can just like stuff stuff into. So being ready to get caught out, I think is really important. Like when a real crazy downpour comes along, you may not want to stay shooting. You might want to seek a little bit of cover for a while and protect your gear. And I think that's really good advice, is to always have a kind of plan B so that you are ready. And I should have done that on this trip.
Here in Australia, I often sacrifice my hat or my t-shirt to put it on top of the camera, which is probably not the ideal scenario down there in Antarctica, putting your jacket over the camera, but that even can help as well. And when you look at the camera bodies, the main areas where the rain definitely comes in is the buttons at the top, and it's also the gap between like the EVF and the hot shoe area up there. I've even seen people tape up this gap up here between above the EVF with some electrical tape, and that seems to stop water from coming into the camera. So I think what I try whenever I'm out, I usually don't have many things with me. I do have this lens called Raincoat, which is pretty good as well. It goes over your whole lens, but I don't know how practical it will be on like a much smaller lens.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes with a smaller one, you're better off just with a plastic bag or something like that. You mentioned another element that can be one of the actual worst, which is sand. The first day that I started shooting in the Falkland Islands, it was howling wind, beautiful sunny day, but howling wind. And all the penguins were coming in out of the water, and you wanted to be down on the beach laying down. But the wind was just kicking up this sand. And luckily it was kind of a short little brief shoot. But right away I was like laying down thinking, oh my God, this is just a terrible way to start this trip, exposing my camera to all this fine sand that's just blowing in it. Gets in all the little buttons and things like that. And again, I should have had a weatherproof cover on it and tuck my hand in there and keep as much of that stuff out. I think the moral of the story here is we should all have a minimalist rain sleeve for our camera that we basically always have with us. Clip it onto your belt, put it in your fanny pack, put it in the backpack that you have, and you should really try to always have that with you in the field.
I must admit though that personally I always struggle with putting big things over my camera a little bit as well, because I feel like it kind of hinders my normal flow of my hands at times, because you're a lot more restricted in a way. So I'm always hesitant to use it, but there's certainly situations that we should use it. And it would also be nice to know from you guys, what are you using to protect your camera? Make sure to let us know in the comments.
Okay, so to summarize, when you're shooting in extreme conditions, first of all, if you don't have a good rain cover for your camera, go out and buy one right now. Maybe we'll put a link down in the description here of ones that we use. But just like I just said, I have probably 3 rain covers and I still got caught out. I didn't bring it, I was on shore, it started blizzarding. So the most important thing, if you get caught out, the most vulnerable part of your camera, whether you shoot with a Canon R3 or a Nikon Z9 or a Sony A1 or a lower model, the most vulnerable part is going to be the hot shoe of the camera or where the EVF is, the top of the camera essentially. So if you do get stuck out, try to find, whether it's a shirt or a hat or anything that you can kind of cover that part of the camera and keep that as dry as possible, and that will hopefully protect your camera. But those are the most important things. Oh, and if you're in dusty conditions, sandy conditions, you don't want to be changing lenses at all. You want to really try to think about where that sand can get in and be as careful as you possibly can. And when you get away from the shoot, you're back and sheltered, try to kind of blow the sand out as best you can, or if you have like a paintbrush or one of those little blower brushes, try to get that sand out of there as quickly as you can, because the more it gets into the buttons and things, the more problems it can cause.
Or do what I do and just turn the manual focus ring until the grinding sound goes away.
Not recommended.
All right, but back to shooting in Antarctica, because I know shooting in snow is usually quite difficult because everything is so bright, and because your camera always tries to create like neutral gray with the metering, it tends to always underexpose everything. So whether you're in manual mode and some other mode, you'll always have to overexpose a fair bit in the field. Is that what you found as well? What sort of the best tips you can give people that go into winter now and will hopefully shoot in nice snowy conditions very soon?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. I mean, when you are shooting in a very bright environment like snow, and especially if it's sunny on snow, there's basically nothing brighter than that you're ever going to encounter. And the camera's meter, just to clarify for the audience, the camera's meter, what it's trying to do is always create the average, right? It's trying to always make the scene that you're pointing your camera at neutral gray, a medium gray. And so in that situation where the whole scene is so bright, it meters for it to be much darker. So you take a picture and everything looks very flat and gray and everything. So you definitely have to add quite a bit of light and overexpose the scene. I found that normally I shoot aperture priority with exposure compensation a lot of the time in the rainforest, but I found in the snow, I really wanted to shoot manual mode, just had more control and just to lock in that sort of those values for the snow and then let everything go. I think, for example, if you're out in Yellowstone National Park and you're shooting a bison in the snow, it's kind of a different scene because you can simply basically meter for the animal, the darker animal, and just let the snow do whatever it's going to do. But in this case, we had, black and white penguins on snow. And so you really wanted to watch those highlights. I think at the end of the day, though, it comes back to the same simple answer, which is just to expose to the right. You just want to push the highlights, push the metering as far as you can to the right, and then in post-processing you can kind of work it to get that little bit of a differentiation between the penguin and the snow.
And this is also where editing would come in, of course, because you can get it close to looking good in the field, but especially separating like white plumage from white snow is something that you can only really get done with the editing, right? So was there anything you found particularly difficult with images with so much snow or so much white in them?
I still, even though of course I know all of these things about exposure in the field, and even though I was looking at my histogram, I still felt as though when I got the images back, they still weren't as, far to the right as I maybe would have wanted, because of course the tendency for everyone is always to want to make sure that you don't blow out the whites, right? But in some cases, I felt like I still needed to push the exposure a fair bit in the digital darkroom in post-processing. So that gets your sort of, your brightness where you want it to be. A lot of the images had a very strong blue cast, even though I was adjusting my white balance in the field. definitely trying to differentiate the white balance and the warmth on the snow and ice and on the bird itself. I think that gives you an opportunity to create some differentiation between the background, which you can make cooler and more like you expect snow and ice to be, and the bird you can kind of warm up a little bit, and that'll create a sort of differentiation between the warm white and the cool white.
So you'd basically like create a mask that selects the bird and you warm that up a little bit, and then you do like on the background, you pull out maybe some saturation and you make it a little bit cooler. Is that sort of what you did?
Yeah, exactly. And this is something that you can even do with our new brush packs, for example, because, for example, one of the brushes is warm it up. So you could simply warm up the bird. We also have cool it down. You could cool down the snow. And of course, you can adjust the brightness as well with the brush pack. So those I've been using a lot as I've been editing these images from Antarctica, just adding a bit of saturation, adjusting contrast, adjusting the tonal ranges. And the brush pack just makes it so easy right at your fingertips.
And so if you guys want to do one-click raw editing with our PROSETS or learn all about Photoshop editing and our brush pack, make sure to check these out down there in the description.
When I got back to the land of internet, I noticed that Adobe Camera Raw had an update, the most recent version. I'm sure you've also noticed that. And I looked, usually the little splash screen pops up, what's new? Okay, what's new? Often it's like nothing too exciting, but I was like, oh, what's this point color thing? And it's pretty cool. If you haven't tried it, I really recommend, whether you're in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, try this point color thing. It's basically gives you so much control over adjusting individual colors. Of course, before we could go into the HSL tab and adjust individual colors, and it's always getting more and more intuitive and things. This point color is really cool though. You select a very precise color range and you can even adjust what that range is, and then you can adjust the hue, saturation, and luminance. So with this very nuanced shades of white and gray and blue that I've been dealing with these snow and ice and penguin images, I've found that new tool to be very helpful. So check it out and you might find that it helps you in your image editing as well.
Well, that's some good editing and some very nice photos. Looks like an awesome trip overall. And you just told me you're so tired and jet-lagged, and because you love that so much, apparently you're already going back to Argentina next week. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the busy season. See, the key with the planning your trips is when you have jet lag, you just go away again immediately, and that way you don't even have to get over your jet lag. Now, before we get into the photo of the week here, a few weeks back, we had a giveaway for the Lenscoat Ground Pod. So the winner of that is Björn Einar Nielsen.
So congrats, and make sure to send me an email so we can hit you up with your gift. And for everyone else, we're going to have another giveaway in the next episode.
And just a quick reminder, whenever we do giveaways, guys, there's always a lot of spammers down in the comments. So just remember, we will never contact you and tell you you won down in the comments. We will not do that. We'll announce it on the show, and then we'll have a dialogue via email. So don't get scammed by those scammers.
So Glenn, now to the photo of the week. What's the first photo you brought us from all the almost 50,000 photos that I tagged with Bird Photo Show on Instagram now?
Okay, well, the first photo that I brought for us this week, it jumped out at me because, I've seen a lot of photos of mandarin ducks, and probably most of them are escaped, domestic birds or whatever. But I haven't seen that many flight shots of mandarin ducks. Have you, Jan?
Now that you ask me, I probably haven't, and it definitely looks quite nice.
Yeah, I think here, I don't know really the need for this 4x5 or whatever it is longer crop. Like I would have definitely cropped this to be square just to highlight the bird more. I just don't see especially for Instagram, I don't see the reason to present it with more space above and beyond. What do you think about the crop, Jan?
I think for Instagram, I guess 4x5 gives you the most screen space, so there's always an incentive to do that. But I agree, in this case, it doesn't really add that much whether there's green on top of the bottom. The only thing I would do probably on this photo is just do curve and add a bit more blacks to this photo, because I feel like it looks a bit overall washed out, and you could also darken the eye a little bit on the bird to give it a little bit more focus and also make the image appear a bit sharper, I think.
It's probably one of the most beautiful ducks in the world, and I think everybody wants to photograph that species. So to get a flight shot is especially nice. So Gaz Photo UK, nicely done.
So the first image I brought is a pigeon from New Zealand by Leslie Wild Photography, and I think it's actually a New Zealand pigeon, even though I'm not 100% certain. I think it's a beautiful bird on a nice perch with a decent background that's sort of nicely framed by the branches around it. And the only thing I would personally do is probably make the belly a bit more white. It sort of has a yellow-green cast. And then I would also lighten the area behind the bird's head and the back a little bit so that the green of the bird separates a little bit more from the background so the bird overall stands out a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the shot. It's a beautiful bird. I think the thing that I'm struggling a little bit with here is that it's like kind of a lot of it's like sort of almost, there's maybe a little too much texture in some of the foliage around the bird that kind of distracts a little bit. So I think the challenge is trying to make the bird stand out, right? So whether you're lightening the background or enhancing the bird in some way, or another option would be to crop it for Instagram a little bit tighter so that you crop some of that in focus stuff in the top out. And then a little bit would probably still be poking in and then just clone that out. So just a few options. The main thing is thinking about what is the problem here. And it's this sort of bird that's not standing out quite as much from the background. So there's a few strategies that if you wanted to, you could try. All right, my second image this week is a real showstopper, beautiful color palette in this one from Adsy Edwards. We've got a Major Mitchell's cockatoo, which I know is one of your favorites. And it's always cool. I actually don't think I have any photos in my collection where I have a really nice rainbow like this in the background. So it's pretty stunning. And I think the composition is kind of interesting. It's sort of almost like a challenging composition, but for me, it kind of works with the rainbow there. And then this beautiful Major Mitchell's cockatoo. Obviously, it would be amazing if it had popped its crest up, but still a really cool image of this guy. What do you think, Jan?
I think the colors look really nice. The editing looks really good. I could see this working a bit wider so it doesn't feel like the bird is so close to the edge of the frame and you still probably get even more of the rainbow into the shot. I mean, it kind of works because the bird's almost looking backwards back into the frame, but at the same time, it feels like if there wasn't a rainbow, you probably wouldn't have framed it like that. So
Definitely
you
not.
wonder, possibly you could have also walked to the left to put the rainbow slightly in a different position of the bird. But definitely a nice photo that works the way it is, even though I think most people that look at it will think, what about the composition?
That's what I mean by saying a challenging composition, because you can totally see exactly why they presented it this way because of the rainbow. And you have to think, I think, in an image like this, sometimes there's a second element to the photo that is almost as much of the subject of the photo. So normally with bird photography, the bird is by far the subject. But in this case, the rainbow, the background, is such a compelling part of the image that it's sharing the stage with the bird. So in that case, I think the composition does work. And as you mentioned, the photographer is very lucky that the bird turned its head that far, because if it was just looking kind of off, this composition would not work. So I think it works. What do you guys think about these types of, not the normal types of composition? Is that something that you look for in the field or when you're editing your images? Let us know down in the comments.
My next image is from Photo Appeal, a double shovel or two shovelers in flight. And I think it's a pretty cool shot. There's probably not too much I changed. Maybe I feel like you could tame the whites on the bird slightly, but overall I think it's a really nice shot and cool to kind of get a double banking pose, which is hard enough to get with just one bird.
No, definitely cool to get the two birds posing like that. I think for me, if I was like, I can imagine myself editing this image, and I agree the whites look a little hot, hard to know with Instagram and the compression and stuff. But the one thing that personally I would work on is a little bit in the background, right between the upper bird and the lower bird's back. There's this kind of bright white
I was just
bit in the
looking at that.
background. Yeah, and I think that's something that I would just work on that, whether just grabbing the edges with the patch tool and dragging them out, or just a really low opacity clone stamp, selecting the background and doing it. There's lots of ways you could do it, but I just think that does grab your eye. It's the little things in the editing, and that's why, the photo of the week has kind of turned into this what would we do thing. And the whole point of that is to try to get people to think about how they're editing and how they're presenting their images and how they can maybe just take them up that little bit of a higher level and improve them in that little bit of a way, or just do something a little different. All right, my final image this week is by Nathalie Gillen from Belgium. And this is a really different image than the other ones we've looked at today. And I think it's a really cool shot. It's nice to look for these different opportunities. This bird really lends itself to this tight headshot, that really cool band. The bill is so interesting looking, that vibrant red set against the black with the white stripe and then this cool little shape. I think it's a perfect presentation of this really interesting portrait of this bird. Very well done, very symmetrical, right down the bill. You could definitely consider changing some stuff with the one upper side being kind of lighter and the other side being darker. I would wonder about, making both sides kind of uniformly dark. But either way, I think it's a very strong portrait of this black swan.
It looks great. Looks like there's definitely a little bit more editing involved in creating that sort of dramatic look with the dark background. And I assume the brighter one areas might even be one of those gradient filters in Lightroom, so I'm not entirely sure. But I agree that in this case, you probably don't need one side to be brighter than the other one. I think because it's so symmetrical, the brighter side is almost throwing off the symmetry in it, because you have one dark side, one bright side, and everything else is sort of the same right down the middle. So you feel like if it came out from the dark on both sides so that it kind of peaks on the red beak, it would probably make it an even stronger image, because your eye is basically drawn to the bird's cheek the whole time, where the sort of brightest spot is, because even the white of the beak almost feels darker than the bright spot on the cheek of the bird. So I feel like it's kind of misdirecting your viewer slightly to the upper corner, which it definitely doesn't need in this case. And I think darkening that down and kind of making it transition right onto the eyes and the bird's beak would probably be making it even stronger, but as is also a fantastic image.
Yeah, I think if it was mine, I would keep the background uniformly dark to even highlight the texture and the composition and the shapes of this really cool bird's head as well. All right, Jan, what's your final image this week?
The last photo I brought is of this spotted nutcracker by Heini Wehle, and I think it's a cracking image. And it's just a spectacular bird on a really nice perch with a nice background as well. It's a little bit of a shame that it's hiding the tail right behind that little bit of branch there, but it's not too bad at all. And I think it's really nice. The background's also nice, even though I wonder if I would slightly tone down a little bit of those big golden cubes right in front of the bird's head. But otherwise, I think it's a fantastic photo where I wouldn't really change anything, to be honest.
Yeah, I really like it. I'm not familiar with this bird. I don't know that I've seen too many photos of it. And it's really cool. Here we have the Clark's nutcracker in Canada, and this guy's definitely better looking. And it's a really nice shot. It's a nice clean shot of this bird with a nice background. It's kind of got all the elements, and it's a great shot.
And that wraps up this week's episode of the Bird Photography Show already. Make sure to check out our ProSets, Brush Pack, Masterclass and eBooks down there in the description. Let us know all your thoughts in the comments. Hit that subscribe button and we will see you guys in the next episode very soon. Bye.
See you next time, everybody.